2020. Wow, what a year. It's been one of the most tumultuous years in recent history, but luckily, video games were there for us to pass the time in quarantine. It was yet another great year in gaming, just like any other, honestly, as we saw the release of new consoles with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, while also being delivered some fantastic new titles. With 2020 coming to a close, it's time for one of my favorite videos of the year. After spending the last 12 months critiquing, analyzing, commentating, and reviewing games, it's just nice to take a step back and reflect on all the great experiences I had. So with that, I present my top 10 games of 2020. Number 10. Final Fantasy VII Remake was a special kind of game for many people, but for me, I was a little skeptical going in as it was my first foray into the series, and now it's safe to say my hesitation was unwarranted. Midgar and its underbelly of slums provided a fantastic setting to venture through with some of the most iconic characters in the entire series. Tifa and Aerith were wonderful, and I appreciated Cloud's character growth, but by far, Barrett is the character I will remember most from this title. His big and brash bravado gives way as the story unfolds to reveal a character with a soft side despite his ironclad focus on saving the planet. He was easily one of my favorite characters from any game this year. By far though, the thing that I enjoyed most about this title was the barrage of incredible boss encounters sprinkled throughout it, which culminated in kind of this boss rush during the game's final hours. So many of the games I played this year were content with using uninspired and repetitive bosses, but Final Fantasy VII Remake was the one title that bucked that trend. I mean, come on now, we had a fight against a giant mechanical house. How is that not amazing? It was one of the most memorable boss fights I had in any game this year. In fact, I'd say probably only one boss fight was more memorable than that. And the game's combat system impressed me greatly, as it found a way to maintain a sense of flow, even though moments were frequently slowed down to navigate through menus. The team did a fantastic job of modernizing the combat system without uprooting what had come before. The thing that impressed me most about the combat was the impact it felt like I was having on enemies as I blasted them with Barrett's turret, or Tifa's fists, or Cloud's iconic Buster Sword. And fights were only enhanced by the wonderful score that was present throughout the entire game. These factors allowed the game to overcome some pacing issues, and more importantly, the sensation that it wasn't a complete experience. I was fully satisfied with my adventure when the credits rolled, and I cannot wait to see what's next for this series whenever the next installment is released. Number 9. Animal Crossing New Horizons was my earliest contender for Game of the Year, and it could have easily been higher up on this list if I hadn't been so busy working on other video projects and playing other games. It's a game that I seriously enjoyed for the 30 to 40 hours I put into it, but I struggled as the year progressed to find the necessary time to stick with it. And that's probably my biggest gaming regret of 2020, because New Horizons proved itself as a delightful introduction to the series for a newcomer like me. What wowed me the most about New Horizons was just how well the game was constructed to ensure that everything the player did benefited them in more ways than one. Crafting, customizing, and collecting was the name of the game, as I worked hard every day to transform my island into its ideal state. I built a little neighborhood for all my villagers, while I myself watched from a distance in a cozy seaside home. I used the new terraforming abilities to really improve the layout of the land, and I customized everything to my liking to ensure that everything felt just right. You really have to be mindful when you're playing New Horizons, because it's so easy to get into a groove and just lose track of everything going on in the real world around you. In those moments, your world literally becomes that of your islands. And like I said, everything you do rewards you in multiple ways, whether it's intrinsically through realizing your vision of the perfect island, or extrinsically in the form of Nook Miles and bells that could be used to expand your capabilities even further. One thing that I really loved about New Horizons is how each new day brought new surprises to the island, whether it was the arrival of new merchants or villagers, or a chance to celebrate a holiday with a big event. It's these types of moments that I've really missed the most since putting the game down. And finally, the art direction of the game was one of my favorite of the year. Each villager had a personality all their own, and were granted a series of reactions that were cute as all hell. I never got tired of the looks of this game. It's a case where less was more, as the simple aesthetics won me over. And the main menu theme, oh my goodness, I mean come on, it's easily the most iconic song from any game this year, at least for me. Despite not being able to stick with it fully, Animal Crossing New Horizons was still one of the best games I played in 2020. And the best part is, I know my island will always be there, just waiting for me to return whenever I'm ready. Number 8. Crash 4 It's About Time was the year's most pleasant surprise. It came out of nowhere with a shocking reveal and followed suit with a release just a few months later. After the massive success of the Insane trilogy, a sequel for the Bandicoot seemed inevitable, but its sudden appearance left me in splendid disbelief. The promise of a traditional Crash platformer that harkened back to the PS1 era was a must-purchase for me, and I was not disappointed. Crash 4 immediately felt enticingly familiar as a longtime fan of the series, and I was grateful that the controls felt improved over the remakes from a few years back. I booted up the game and got through the first few levels, amazed at how stunning they looked with tons of detail in the foreground and backgrounds. I cruised through the first few islands, feeling on top of the world as I defeated N. Jin and N. Brio in a bunch of different aesthetically pleasing worlds. The platforming was responsive for the most part, and collecting gems and time relics proved as rewarding as ever. And then I started getting into those later worlds, where the difficulty was increased quite a bit. I quickly found myself losing tons of lives, and I began to get frustrated. But, as I completed some of the more brutal runs, and the frustration melted, I came to appreciate how much better I was getting with the controls. It really reminded me of my experience with Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, where I found myself getting a little bit better in each subsequent run until I was able to take down some of the game's more formidable challenges. This proficiency with the controls was rewarding, even if that's something I didn't realize until this very moment. It was a game that kept me coming back even after I swore I was going to rage quit. The game was no cakewalk, but it remained fun throughout. Except for Cortex Castle. To the folks who made that level, what on earth did we ever do to you? The inclusion of the new masks and new playable characters were mostly a home run as well, especially the Quantum Mask that changed up gameplay in interesting ways by adding new layers of challenge like inverting gravity or the ability to phase through objects. These additions allowed the game to feel fresh without branching too far from the series' roots. And playing as Tawna and Dingodile proved to be a nice change of pace, but Cortex admittingly proved to be a weak inclusion. Crash 4 is brutal for completionists, as levels are very long and there's a ton of things to nab that will push you to your platforming limits. In fact, the game does demand perfection from you if you want to collect everything, so good luck. The nice part is though, that all of that is optional, and for me, I was able to get my fill of the game without losing my will to live. Crash 4: It's About Time proved itself as a challenging yet respectable platformer that rebooted the series by getting it back on the right track. Now, I just hope Spyro gets the same treatment as soon as possible. Number 7. Out of all the games on this list, this one is probably the most controversial. But yes, Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the best 10 experiences I've had in 2020, despite the extensive list of issues. I'm still in the middle of playing it at this point, but I can't deny just how much fun I'm having with the game, as it's set up in one of my favorite formats, making it almost a guilty pleasure of sorts. To get it out of the way, yes, the game has a ton of bugs and missing features that left a lot of players in a state of cyberpsychosis, and rightfully so. The outrage towards this game is justified, but I can't deny my personal experience with it, and that's what I plan to go over here. Night City didn't really impress me too much at first, but as I played and became more familiar with the inner workings of the metropolis and its surrounding regions, I became impressed with the sheer verticality and depth of it. It's by no means the best looking game I've ever played, but at certain moments it really does look quite nice. The character building is well done too, as you can invest points both into attributes and perks to build your own custom version of V. If you want to play a stealthy character or a hacking-based one, you can, but most of the time, hostile combat is going to become a factor. Luckily, there's many different weapon types for you to try out and invest points into so that you're prepared for battle. But by far, what really has invested me into this game, more than anything else, is the quality of the characters and the adventures that they bring you on. Whether it be within the main story or the excellent side content, you're always guaranteed to get rich, in-depth conversations about the events that are unfolding. I spent about the first 20 hours progressing the main story, but once I realized how good the side content is, I've been hopping from quest to quest for the last 10 hours or so. Night City is filled with a lot of great characters with meaty and surprising quest lines that contain captivating stories that will pull you in with a heavy dose of intrigue. The main story and the side quests start off on a great baseline, and they only get better as the story goes on. With all that being said, my review is going to be a lot harsher on the game than this. The issues are real, and CD Projekt Red needs to be held accountable for them. Still, I'm just having a lot of fun with Cyberpunk, and it's easily earned a spot on this list. And the best part is, the game is only going to get better and better as the bugs and other issues are addressed and fixed. I cannot wait to see what this game has in store for me next, as I continue my quest to save V and learn more about Night City and the world of Cyberpunk 2077. Number 6. Spider-Man Miles Morales proved itself to me as being more than just standalone DLC by utilizing the strong foundation set by the original game and expanding on it with new abilities and characters. It's really quite easy to call this game a 1.5 version of the 2018 Spider-Man game. But what's wrong with that? That was already one of the best releases of that year, and now we get more of that? Sign me up! The more grounded story about Miles and his first foray into being Spider-Man was heartfelt and sincere. The developers opted to make the stakes smaller this time around, and it left the personal conflicts between Miles, his uncle, and his friend Finn to feel more realistic than the grandiose tale of the first game. I mean, there's nothing wrong with telling a huge, action-packed, blockbuster Spider-Man story, but it felt refreshing to grapple with something more personal in the game instead of just going down that route again. To be honest with you, I really enjoyed the narrative, but being set loose in New York City to clean up the streets as the webhead once more easily stole the show for me. I knew I was going to love this game from the second I took control of Miles and began free-flow swinging around the city. They nailed web swinging in the first game, and that's only been continued here with excellent traversal that will ensure that you never want to fast travel. The same great combat experience returns too, with new and improved electric charge venom attacks that allow Miles to take out enemies in style while also flexing the PS5's power. They could have just given us the same gadgets and web moves as the previous game, but instead they elected to give Miles a flair of his own, which is appreciated. He's his own Spider-Man and his own person. He's not just a discount version of Peter Parker, and I love that. And the fantastic attention to detail in the animation department made it so that every fight feels like a graceful dance where Spider-Man was usually 1 or 2 steps ahead of his foes. I mean, come on guys, it really just makes you feel like you're Spider-Man. Okay, jokes aside, Miles Morales was one of the best games I played this year, and I look back on it fondly as days go by. Especially considering it will most likely be the last game I ever play on my PlayStation 4. It bookended a console generation for me, and gave me one final adventure with the console that I've come to appreciate the most. I really hope that our next adventure with Spider-Man will find a way to incorporate both Miles and Peter into the game in interesting ways. Again, sign me up for that. So with that, we get to the top 5 and the real heavy hitters. While I enjoyed the previous 5 games a lot, the next 5 are the ones that will really stick with me. Number 5. The remake of Demon's Souls quickly found its way into the top 5, as reaching the fight with Phalanx alone was exhilarating and nostalgic enough to propel it up this list. As a massive fan of the Soulsborne series, this was the one title that kept me up at night trying to find some way to get my hands on a PlayStation 5. I was a month late to the party, but it was worth the wait, as Bluepoint Games did an immaculate job of recreating the eldest Souls game. Exploring Boletaria and its surrounding worlds has never been better, as I cannot believe how good the presentation is in this game. The detailed worlds, the beautiful particle effects, the incredible sound design, and above all, the unbelievable animation work stole the show. And my god, this animation work. In fact, it was so good that I couldn't even bring myself to complete a single playthrough before creating new characters just to see the different animations for all the weapon types. And my goodness, the facial animations, wow, they are truly next gen as well. From a technical level, this game hooked me right from the start, and it hasn't let go. It feels so good to play a Souls game that looks this good at 60 FPS. The remake also pays homage to the original in every way imaginable. If you told me this was developed by From Software, I'd probably believe you immediately. Everything feels how it should. From your movement, to enemy placement, to boss encounters, it's all spot on. The only difference seems to be a series of quality of life decisions that make the game fit in a modern setting. The highlight of the series continues to be the boss encounters, and rediscovering old faces has been a highlight of mine in 2020. Fights with bosses like Flame Lurker and Tower Knight continue to be exhilarating and a true test of the player's skills. Meanwhile, Dragon God was already one of the sickest dragon designs from a video game ever, and while the fight is kind of a gimmick, I was in awe at just how good this boss looked. And to be honest with you, I still haven't finished the game at the time of writing and recording this, and all I want to do right now is close my laptop, turn the game back on, and press onward to see what the next set of bosses and areas has in store for me. And one thing that I've really enjoyed about this game is that it just feels nice to be a part of the Souls community during a new game's launch, as it's something we haven't truly gotten to experience in its entirety since Dark Souls 3. Sure, we all loved Sekiro last year, but without multiplayer, we couldn't get our fix of one of the core components of the series, invasions and summons. It just feels nice to be a part of something like this again, as we all rediscover Boletaria's secrets, as well as tiny new inclusions that Bluepoint has graciously included for dedicated fans to uncover. If you have a PlayStation 5, this is a must-own game. Number 4. This one might be cheating, but Persona 5 was already one of my top 5 favorite games of all time, and so it's no surprise that I instantly fell in love with its enhanced edition, Persona 5 Royal. And let me just put it this way, guys. If the first 85 to 90% of this game wasn't nearly an exact copy of the 2017 game, I would have put it at number 1. I managed to contain my excitement enough, though, to limit it to a number 4 spot, considering it is kind of a re-release and an enhanced edition. But in a year like 2020, when quarantining was a necessity for many, this game provided a way to feel like you were out of the house living a normal life. Hanging out with An, Morgana, Makoto, Ryuji, Haru, Yusuke, Akechi, and Futaba while dealing with the usual hustle and bustle of living life was a nice substitute in a year when we couldn't get out to do much. These characters, along with newcomers like Kasumi and Maruki, made for a wonderful cast. I ended up playing the game with a guide in order to get the platinum, and it felt amazing just to experience everything this game had to offer. Going through the main story again from the base game was a trip down memory lane as I came to care about all the characters all over again. Diving into the palaces and getting to engage with this combat system was just as pleasing as it was in 2017, and the game's sleek sense of style remained strong. But Atlus didn't settle for regurgitating the same experience, as dungeons and combat itself has been remixed with new level design, personas, and maneuvers, including a buff to guns, and of course, the wonderfully choreographed Showtime attacks. I love those. Clobbering, shooting, and blasting away enemies with elemental attacks has never felt so satisfying, and the incredible music returns with new tracks to enhance every single moment of the game. I enjoyed these changes as I played through the same content from the base game, but as I completed more and more of it, my excitement for the new third semester grew. And I was not disappointed, as the new story content was gripping and compelling, while the new palace was fun to navigate. The plot twist with Kasumi was shocking, and her awakening to her persona and joining the Phantom Thieves as they cleared out the new palace was awesome. And it all culminated in my favorite boss fight of the year, a showdown with Dr. Maruki, a morally great character who seeks to aid humanity by ending suffering, but he does so without their awareness. He seemed like a pretty good guy with good intentions, and it really made me question the action of the Phantom Thieves just as much as I did Maruki's. Giving me the chance to side with him was a great moment for player expression, and even though he was doing a lot of good for people, he was doing so in the wrong way. This led to a fantastic and lengthy boss fight against a challenging opponent who threw everything at me and took my team to their limits. So it's safe to say I was not disappointed in the slightest with all the new content. It made an already great game even better. Like I said earlier, if this was the first release of Persona 5, this would have been my game of the year. There's no doubt in my mind. And so I cannot recommend this game enough. Please play it. Please give it a shot. Number 3. Out of all the games on this list, Naughty Dog's The Last of Us Part 2 is the game that shifted around the most. It spent time barely even cracking the top 10, but it also spent time at number 1, as my thoughts on the game evolve with the passing of time. In the end, I settled on the number 3 spot, mostly because of how much this game stuck with me after I put the controller down. If ever there was a single-player linear game with one unchangeable ending that demanded a second playthrough, this game would be it. My first playthrough of the game, like many others, left me disappointed because the inclusion and prominence of Abby just wasn't what I was looking for in a sequel. I wanted more time to explore the relationship between Joel and Ellie, not to parade around Seattle with a group of characters that I had no prior connection with. During that first playthrough, I put up so many mental barricades to the Abby sections, rejecting everything it was trying to teach me about the cycle of revenge and violence, and the lesson that there's always two sides to every story. These lessons seem like common knowledge, and they came at the cost of the game's pacing, as the title insisted on just beating you over the head with these lessons. I talked about these issues ad nauseum in my review of the title, but a funny thing happened after I uploaded the video. The game stuck with me. I moved on to new titles, yet I found myself thinking about The Last of Us Part 2. The emotional moments I had connected with throughout the game just kind of lingered in my mind, beckoning me to come back to the game to see if I had given it a truly fair shot. I wondered if I would enjoy the game more now that the original disappointment had dissipated, and I knew the direction that the narrative was going. The curiosity got the better of me as I revisited the game. The objective issues remained, but I found myself growing a deeper appreciation for the game and the direction that it went in. Yes, the presentation and technical work of this game was unbelievably good, still best in class. And yes, the combat was improved over the previous game, with more fluid animations and an increased roster of weaponry. And yeah, the efforts towards world building was equally as commendable. But, ultimately, the game's ability to draw real emotion out of me is what allowed it to climb this high on the list, and they did it through powerfully human moments and touching performances. Joel singing Future Days to Ellie, Ellie singing Take On Me to Dina, the verbal argument between Ellie and Dina, the final confrontation between Abby and Ellie, and the flashbacks and final moments shared between Joel and Ellie has stuck with me for a long time, and they're gonna continue to do so. The thing that I personally love most about video games is their vast potential for storytelling, and while the bits in between are riddled with pacing issues, these moments of human connection and emotion felt so tangible that they managed to overcome the other issues in my mind. And for that reason, The Last of Us Part 2 finds itself this high on the list. Number 2. This was a tough call, but my runner-up for Game of the Year is Spiritfarer, a mesmerizing and captivating game about death and the natural anxiety that comes along with it. This was a game I had seen at E3 last year, and while I was intrigued then, it actually slipped through the cracks and I kinda ended up forgetting about it, even missing out on the game's initial release. Luckily, I was reminded of it and quickly gave it a whirl in the latter days and weeks of summer. I think it's only natural for people to fear death, especially with the uncertainty that comes along with it. Spiritfarer recognizes that uneasiness about the subject and looks to explore it in meaningful and insightful ways without ever crossing into the realm of pretentiousness. The game doesn't pretend to have all the answers about death. Instead, it just introduces us to characters who are dying and lets them have their final moments to break down their lives and what dying means to them. It's not all bleak though. This game is more about celebrating life, both the good and bad moments. It frames death through the perspective of life, and makes sure that every character's perspective is at the very least life-affirming. Its gentleness and genuineness easily won me over, and I couldn't wait to meet each character, learn about their lives, and then comfort them in their last few moments as they openly express themselves in what it meant to live and die. This is why Spiritfarer was such a special experience for me. But underneath all of that was a wonderful management game that constantly had the player crafting resources, building new commodities and living quarters, exploring islands, and upgrading their ship. The hustle and bustle of the gameplay mimic that of our real everyday lives, and I found it important to make time to check in with the characters and spend some time relaxing. It was a nice lesson to carry over into the real world. One of the most brilliant components of the gameplay is that you're constantly traveling from destination to destination on your ship, but there's rarely any downtime for the player, as there's always something to be doing on your ship. Out of all the games I played this year, this was the easiest to lose track of time with, as the minute-to-minute gameplay always provided something to do, and I really love that. And my final note on this game would be this: it's stylistically beautiful. The aesthetic quality of this game wowed me, as the hand-drawn art style blended beautifully with the watercolored look. The attention to detail in animation was clearly prioritized during development, and it allowed this game to truly feel alive. Spiritfarer shot up this list very quickly, and it nearly took the #1 spot. It just did so many things right throughout the game, and I'm proud to say it's the highest ranking I've ever given to an indie game in my 4 years on YouTube. #1. And with that, we reach the #1 spot. My game of the year for 2020 is Ghost of Tsushima, mostly because it was the most complete experience I had in gaming this year. From presentation to gameplay to narrative, this game rarely, if ever, dropped the ball, as it started off at a very high level of quality and never dipped throughout the roughly 40 hours that I spent with it. The game world was breathtaking and full of life, and they chose not to obstruct it with an annoying HUD element that would pull you out of the experience. Instead, navigation was done through a new system, the Guiding Winds, which puts mini-maps everywhere to shame. This system allowed you to patrol the lands of Tsushima and take in all its beauty, and how beautiful it was. Even just walking around on horseback at sunset was gorgeous. And don't even get me started on the haiku scenes, where this already impressive presentation was taken up another few notches. The game continuously made my jaw drop. The combat was fast, fluid, fun, and multi-layered, while also connecting thematically with the story being told. Jin started out as a noble samurai who fought with honor, but after witnessing the devastation that the Mongols brought to his land, he chooses to adapt and fight more from the shadows in order to pull victory from the grasps of defeat. This opened up numerous options for the player to experiment with in order to find the playstyle that they enjoyed the most. Sure, you could fight as an honorable samurai most of the time if you chose, but fitting the enemy's numbers with a series of ghost weaponry, including smoke bombs, kunai, poison darts, and fire bombs, and even more, gave you a better chance at victory. There was always options at your disposal, and that was true for the leveling system as well. Earning a skill point was exciting because the game offered so many different ways to spend it, whether it meant upgrading ghost weapons, unlocking new exploration advantages, learning new combat stances, and much, much more. It's one of the few games I played this year that forced me to make tough decisions while leveling up. The world building was some of the finest I've seen since The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and this is due mostly to the excellent side content available for the player to complete. Side quests, ally quests, and Mythic Tales quests all gave the player a little bit more insight into this world and its inhabitants. The Mythic Tales quests unlocked new combat abilities, and the side quests fleshed out the world, but the ally quests were truly incredible. These were lengthy and meaty chains of quests that took the player on an adventure with some of Tsushima's most interesting people, like Lady Masako, Yuria the Thief, and my personal favorite, Sensei Ishikawa. By the end of these long quest lines, I felt a strong connection to these characters and was impressed with how they operated in the world with their own agency. I felt like I was able to influence them a little bit as Jin, like as much as one person could, but it truly felt like they were on their own life paths. Each of them had a lesson to teach Jin and the player about this world, and more specifically about themes of loss and courage. And finally, the overarching narrative was solid as well. Perhaps a little simple in some regards, but truly magnificent in its finale. I won't spoil the game's ending in its entirety here, but the final meeting between Jin and his uncle was a powerful moment that showed how trusting Sucker Punch was in the characters that they had created. Instead of sacrificing the integrity and beliefs of one of these men to allow for a happy ending, they let each character stick to their guiding beliefs, even if they clashed with one another's. This confidence in character design amazed me throughout the game, and that remained true up to the very end. Ghost of Tsushima ended up being a delightful experience with its beautiful world, wonderful characters, engaging combat, and amazing quest design, and it was paced incredibly as well. When I finished the game, I felt satisfied. I wasn't starving for more content, but I also didn't feel like the game dragged on for far too long. And as a show of good faith, Sucker Punch even gave us a massive free update called Legends, where the player could engage in a live service mode that offered a cooperative mode with tons of new challenges to face using this proficient combat system. As I said at the beginning of this section, this was the game that offered the most complete and satisfying experience this year. And for that reason, Ghost of Tsushima is my game of the year for 2020. So, that's 2020 done. Thank goodness, I guess, after all the horrible things that have happened this year. Hopefully, 2021 will bring us all better fortune. Just as with any other year, I had a great time making videos for the channel this year. In particular, the videos I'm proudest to have made this year include the Pokemon Sword critique, the video about Erica, game narratives, and FMV games, the Ghost of Tsushima critique, the analysis of the Crash Bandicoot crates, and probably my favorite psychology of gaming to make this year was episode 35 about phobias and Until Dawn. Oh, and of course the 2 Slime Mega critiques I made. If you're a fan of the channel, I greatly appreciate you watching my videos and supporting me as much as you can. I gotta give a special shout out though to my main man, Jason Blundell. I hope I said your name right, man, who has consistently left encouraging comments on all of my videos to keep me pushing forward. Thanks, Jason. I appreciate ya. Anyway, as we move into 2021, you can expect more videos. I might shift even further into making long format content, since that seems to do best for the channel, but we'll see. I'll be kicking off the new year most likely with a channel update and a lengthy review of Cyberpunk 2077. Until then, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing for more, follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp, and as always, have a nice day and take care.